morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Fanis Papathanasiou. I'm a diplomatic correspondent with the Greek public television, and I'm welcome you to the next panel, which is about building peaceful coexistence, the road forward of Greek-Turkish relations. I want to welcome our speakers. I'm very happy that we have real experts and excellent company with us to give us a good insight about the Greek-Turkish relations. I will start with Mr. Alexandros Diakopoulos. Mr. Diakopoulos is a Vice Admiral retired of the Greek Navy, former National Security Advisor to the Greek Prime Minister. Mr. Diakopoulos, good morning. Good to have you.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Next to him is Mr. Selim Yenel, is the President of the Global Relations Forum. Good morning.
Good morning.
Next to him is Mr. Mustafa Aydin, President of the International Relations Council of Turkey. Is a professor of international relations at Kadir University, well known here to the Greek professors with a long expertise in the Greek-Turkish relations. And Nilgun Arisan is a director of the Center of EU Studies, the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey. Next to me is Mr. Nick Larigakis, an old friend, President and CEO of the American Hellenic Institute in the United States. So I will start with Mr. Diakopoulos. Mr. Diakopoulos, give us your take in regard to the Greek-Turkish relations and the prospects after the elections in Turkey. How do you think? What is your take as far as the day after the elections between Greece and Turkey?
Yes, the current detente in the relation of the two countries gives us some hope that at some point, at least that we have the condition to start talking and solving. But we have been here before many times, and the problems have been entrenched for over half a century. It would not be an easy process. To take a quotation, a literary quotation, if you allow me, as William Faulkner was saying, the past is never dead, it's not even past. He was saying this for the southern United States, but it applies here very well. We are burdened by the past, and we're burdened by the fact that during these 50 years, the problems which started with the delimitation of the continental shelf have expanded enormously. And without having, I don't want to be or to sound anti-Turkish, but to my mind, the way I examined the situation, it was more or less Turkey who was expanding the scope of the differences. I mean, till '96, we didn't have the gray zones. And till, I don't know, 2019, 18, we didn't have the blue homeland. All those were added to an already very burdened situation. So how this will go from now on? Geography dictates that the two countries should find a way to solve their problem. They're like two Siamese, like a Siamese where the two heads fight one with the other. This cannot go on in the long run forever. A situation should be found where they find a way to coexist, because geography dictates them to coexist. I don't know. There are known unknowns, what the situation will be after the war in Ukraine, who will be the next government in Turkey, and in Greece, we have elections. And there are unknown unknowns. And in a situation so delicate, fraught with so many problems, with the burden of history, with the initial positions so far apart, and the positions who are diverging as the time passes, and with many people and constituencies and vested interests in both countries who can easily undermine any process of solving the problem. It's extremely difficult. So, to end up to close, we have to see the dynamics, two dynamics, the dynamics between the two countries and the dynamic of the international system, or the Western system, if you want. From the point of view of the dynamic of the Western system, and having in mind the war in Ukraine, now there is a strong, to my mind, incentive that the two countries can find a solution and that will enhance stability in the whole Eastern Mediterranean. The crucial thing is the dynamic between the two countries and how this will play out. This I cannot foretell. Thank you.
Professor Aydin, what will be the basic elements to build a peaceful coexistence between the two countries? Give us the views of Ankara as far as this.
Well, I don't presume to know the view from Ankara because Ankara is changing as everybody's keep talking. But I presume to know the long-term dynamics of Greek-Turkish relations, which are problematic and conflictual. As already indicated, that history is not past in Turkish-Greek relations. We live in the history, and we keep repeating and recreating the history, reinterpreting it to suit our needs. As far as I can see, the real intention for years on both sides of the Aegean has been to manage the conflictual situation, not to solve it. The expectation, again, on both sides, especially on the political level, but I think it goes to intellectuals and bureaucracy, is that in some unspecified future time, the environment, the global environment, would change in such a way that will benefit their own country more. So they on both sides, keep delaying the resolution and the final solution. And let me remind you that a concept of a compromise have negative connotations, both in Turkish and in Greek. We don't like compromises on both sides of the Aegean. So when I'm looking for the future, I see and I know that the things that need to be told between two countries have already been told. There is nothing in the world that we haven't told between two countries, between diplomats, between politicians, between academics and intellectuals. Everything has been told. And we also know the parameters of the solution. They are already put in paper. In fact, they were ready to signing at least twice in the recent history. So looking to the future, there is no magic formula. We don't need to renegotiate everything from the scratch. We have to just have a willingness to finally compromise on some of our own identities. That's the biggest problem, because history is our identities, both in Greece and in Turkey, and that history is replete with conflictual attitudes, and we all have long list of grievances against each other. So we have to accept the reality that the life is not perfect. It doesn't work according to our own images. That's the first thing. The second is, I think, I always give an example of France and Germany after the Second World War. They spent huge amount of money consciously to build up generations who understand each other, who speaks their own languages with each other. That has not happened in Greek-Turkish relations, even in the last 20 years of rapprochement, last period of rapprochement, which took like 20 years. But there is no investment on younger generations to understand each other and to understand their own languages. So if you want to solve Greek-Turkish relations for the long term, because the problems are structural, problems are historical, and problems are long term, they are not going to be easily changed by change of government either in Athens or in Ankara, because we already have so many changes of governments in both sides and it didn't result in solutions. So we have to look at fundamental structural changes, which takes time. Mm-hmm. We have to invest on the younger generation so that in 20 years' time we have totally different mindset on the both sides of the Asia.
Nilgun, in short term and long term, what would be the basic elements of a formula for a coexistence between Athens and Ankara?
Of course, it again depends whether there would be a change in government in Ankara or not.
Let's go one scenario and second scenario with the opposition victory.
Let's say the current government remains, Erdogan remains. The recent kind of honeymoon period would continue for a while, and we owe this honeymoon period to tragic events in both Turkey and Greece. In Turkey we had this earthquake, and in Greece we had this tragic train crash. And both, I mean, we are grateful to Greece to send their rescue teams even before the state institutions in Turkey to help the survivors. And Turkey also approached Greece with sympathy and support after the train crash. So like the case in 1999, after the double earthquakes in both countries, we are living a kind of honeymoon period. But if Erdogan remains, I don't know how long it is going to last, because as we have one-man power in Turkey, very authoritarian, we can go back to the confrontational foreign policy vis-à-vis Greece with a very poisonous discourse like we had in the past. So this we are currently living in a cold peace. This is not my term. This is a term used by Dimitris Triantapoulou, a Greek academician in Turkey. So the current situation might not be sustainable in the medium term. If there would be a change in the government, the opposition laid down its principles in foreign policy that will be crucial for Turkey-Greece relations as well. They say they are going to respect international law and the current alliances of Turkey, I mean NATO and the EU. They are going to respect the international conventions that Turkey has signed and adopted, mainly European Convention on Human Rights. And they say they are going to use diplomacy and dialogue instead of this very poisonous narrative. And they are not going to question, even verbally, the territorial integrity of their neighbors, and they would pursue an institutional foreign policy based on the knowledge and experience of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Even these principles signal a very important change, maybe not in short term, but definitely this peaceful, positive environment will go on in the short term, but in the medium term, maybe, because there are many opportunities, there will be many areas of cooperation if a structured dialogue with a timetable can be pursued. I'll say one last thing. Even now, we witness very important positive developments, like Foreign Minister of Greece, Mr. Dendias, proposed that cooperation in energy with Turkey. And both Turkey and Greece, they are supporting each other in international institutions. Turkey supports the membership, non-permanent membership of Greece in the National Security Council in the UN, and Greece is supporting Turkey's candidacy in the Secretariat General for International Maritime Organizations. Maybe these are small things, symbolic things, but it's important. So, in short, I say if current government remains, I'm not sure about the medium term, but if there would be a change in the government, I'm very positive for the short and medium term.
Mr. Yenel, do you think the energy, as Nilgun mentioned, could be an incentive for Turkey and the Greek-Turkish relations?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here, and this is the third panel that I've listened to the first two panels, and everybody's talking about misunderstandings, understandings, and dialogue. So definitely this is very important. And we need to find areas in which we can cooperate, and I think energy is one of them. Atmospherics is very important. I'm living in a déjà vu right now because 23 years ago, when both countries had earthquakes, and then we proceeded to reconcile, there was a proposal by George Papandreou at the time, the foreign minister, to create a group to help Turkey with regard to EU. EU group, and Nilgun was also part of that. And we had a lot of meetings together. But it didn't continue, unfortunately. So we have to find a way in which we can have mutual, let's say, opportunities and mutual interests. And energy is one of them. Because the EU was something that was actually helpful for Turkey, and it was an idea that could bring them together. But energy is actually something that would actually, help both countries. Because right now we're finding gas, and who knows what else we're going to find in the Black Sea. And most crucially, of course, the Eastern Mediterranean. And there's a lot of conflict going on. And up to now, today, I haven't heard much about Cyprus. Cyprus is the big elephant in the room, despite its size. And of course, we have to find a way to actually not maybe solve it, because that's unsolvable, according to myself, after seeing so many decades of negotiations that have faltered, but it has to be managed. And I think that this can be done, as long as both countries' leaders can avoid being populists and find a way to actually come together, because it's in our interests. And I think we can also find a way to manage the Cyprus issue in that respect. So energy is a crucial point. Thank you for mentioning that.
Mr. Larigakis, how people in Washington view the prospects in the relation between Athens and Ankara?
Well, thank you, Fani, and thank you for Simeon Tsimogos and the Delphi Forum for this invitation, and congratulate him for providing this forum for this discussion on world issues for this last 4 days. Let me start by saying this. The geographies are not going to change. Greece and Cyprus occupy a geography that will never change and will forevermore be there as long as this planet is still there. Having said that, this is an area of great geostrategic importance for the United States, NATO, and for Western Alliance interests. Major commerce, trade, and energy transit the region. And of course, they are both members of NATO since 1952, and they both occupy an area of what has been known to say the arch of instability around the region. So they are extremely important to the projection of US geostrategic interests and also of Western NATO alliance interess. Having said that, though, there's obviously problems within the relationship between Turkey and Greece. The way it gets solved is you have respect for international law. In any civil society, in any country, there's going to be those who commit crimes. You have a police force, you have a judicial, and everyone is equal under the law, even within a country. Well, that, in my opinion, also has to be at the international level as well. There are international agreements. There's the UN Charter, there's the NATO Charter, there's the UNCLOS, of which Turkey is not a signatory to, but they do acknowledge it for their purposes in the Black Sea. But you can't have a rules-based international order and be selective within the context of how you apply the rules-based international order. We have the invasion of Ukraine, a despicable situation that has been perpetrated against one of the largest countries, second largest countries in Europe, by Mr. Putin. The world has reacted, NATO has reacted, the EU has reacted, Turkey has not reacted. Greece was one of the first and has been appreciated by the United States at numerous levels. Having said that, though, Kuwait, Ukraine, Cyprus are the same violations of international law. And I speak only in facts. Last year, there were 11,000 approximately violations of Greek territorial airspace. It's still, 50 years later next year, an illegal occupation of a NATO member, because Turkey's NATO, of an EU country called Cyprus. And Mr. Erdogan has called for a two-state solution as opposed to a situation to resolve the problem. The point is, Washington looks at this, they understand the importance of the two, they need both to be able to project that particular image, but they've noticed the provocative actions of Mr. Erdogan, and I think have shifted to a certain degree. We've seen with Alexandros and some of these other actions. The point is, though, these are two countries that live side by side, and it behooves first and foremost them to be able to have good relations, to be able to promote the assets that the region can provide, not just for themselves, but also within their alliances that they belong to. But Washington sometimes has played games, which in my opinion, has created Mr. Erdogan by appeasement. You know, you can't have certain actions by Turkey and then the State Department spokesperson coming out and saying, well, we want both parties to retain from provocative statements and actions. Well, with all due respect, it's only one that's being provocative in that regard. So if there's this level of appeasement and Mr. Erdogan is looking, or whoever the Turkish future potential leaders or politicians and policymakers will be, if they're looking for that little wiggle room, they will continue to push the envelope. And this is what they do when they come into the 6 to 10 mile range. Even though Greece has a right to extend its rights of water to 12 nautical miles, and Turkey has cautious belly, still as official policy. These actions have to cease and desist, abide by international law. Just like on a soccer field, you have two competing teams for one goal, to win. But you need a referee, you need an official. I think the United States needs to step that up. The two countries have to engage, obviously, but I still think the United States is the leading power in the world because of the investments that it has made in Turkey through 7 to 10, through the Truman Doctrine, and the importance of both countries. The United States needs to step up its game, in my opinion, okay, to provide for this peace and stability to continue to be enhanced, and for the two countries to ultimately live in peace and harmony for the better of U.S. interest and NATO interest. But it cannot be an appeasement. It cannot be perceived in any way of appeasement.
Mr. Diakopoulos, what do you think? Do you think if at the elections in 14th of May, Erdogan will be a winner, we'll have more chances to have a peaceful coexistence in the next couple of years and more chances for dialogue? Or with the opposition victory, there are more chances for a dialogue and a peaceful relation between the two countries?
Yes, it's a difficult question. They ask it continuously here in Greece, but I don't think anyone can really answer to that question. If you want schematically, and I might be wrong on that, Erdogan is more prone to extremes in a good way or in a bad way. With the Kemalist opposition, you knew what you expect. No big gestures of friendship, neither threats like I will come one night or I will send a typhoon to Athens. They would say peace in the world, peace in Turkey, but it's more limited, the way they will move. Now, whether Erdogan or the opposition will be more willing to come to a compromise, and it was rightly said that in both countries, compromise is considered a bad word. So we have this thing that we start from an initial position, which is okay. This is how you do negotiations. You start from an initial position in order to find a middle ground solution. In both countries, the initial position has been so much entrenched that it's believed to be the red line, that anything less than the initial position is a treason. So I come back to that, to your question. It depends on how stable the government will be.
Which government?
I have reasons to be
which government?
worried, both governments. You need stability. I have reasons to worry that it won't be very stable, even if it is the opposition. And what the position of the public opinion will be. Now, having in mind that in both countries, but especially in Turkey, the new government has to take very unpopular measures, especially regarding the economy, probably asking the IMF to intervene. It won't have any more free space for compromises in the foreign policy. That will make it politically even more difficult. But let's hope and pray.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Yenel, what do you think?
Well, I mean, if Erdogan wins, he's very famous for U-turns. So he can also find a way to mend fences with Greece if he wants to, if he needs to. If economically he has to do it. And of course, we don't know who will be in charge in Greece after the elections here, and we're hearing that it might take a long time until July. If there's a change of government, I think that the new government would probably try to have less problems in the neighborhood, because it will be concentrating on the economy and trying to build up the society. It will have its own, let's say, challenges inside the country. So it would try to avoid any mishaps around the world, and of course, try to have a good relationship with Greece, of all countries. So, especially also with the EU. So I would expect that the new government, if it changes, would be more conducive, would be more easygoing. The rhetoric would be less harsh, definitely, and therefore we would probably have a honeymoon period, because also there would be reforms in Turkey with regard to human rights, judiciary, rule of law, and so that could bring a honeymoon period between Turkey and the EU, and hopefully with other countries as well. So of course, mine is wishful thinking. I'm rooting for you-know-who.
Professor Aydin, what is your take on this?
Well, let me disabuse everybody that change of government in Turkey would change everything miraculously. Turkish national interests in the Aegean Sea and in the East Mediterranean are very well delineated, very well known, and as Greece's national interest. Change of government, change of personalities, change of rhetoric is important as atmospherics and it's important as environmental. But when it comes to the crux of the matter, the structural discussions, then this honeymoon will be over, whatever the government in Turkey or in Greece. Then it will come to the nitty-gritty, how many miles that a small island should have as a territorial water or not. That's the important, that's the crux of the issue. So change of government in Turkey, yes, it will create a kind of a positive atmospherics, which will allow maybe a resumption of talks and maybe extension of the talks. But let me remind you, between Greece and Turkey, there are so many and so detailed CBMs already existing. And those CBMs failed in 2020 when they need to work. So what's more important is to focus on the issues at hand and to focus on how to compromise on those issues. And also let me remind you again, just an example. It was the Erdogan government who acceded to the Annan plan in Cyprus and to Crans-Montana agreements in Cyprus. It was the opposition who opposed to both of them. And again, another example, there are groups within the opposition parties who has much more inflammatory rhetoric as far as the Aegean Islands concerned. So don't go with the rhetorics, don't go with the personalities, look into the structural realities and the national interest of two countries, not only Turkey and Greece. So in looking to the future, I see a couple of problems, and we have to concentrate on them. One is spoiler Cyprus. Ambassador already mentioned that it's an elephant, and it's a spoiler in Greek-Turkish relations. We have to find a way to freeze Cyprus, to put it in a corner in order to move forward, especially in the Aegean Sea. The second is we have entered recently a new cycle of militarization in the Aegean Sea. Both countries are buying new weapons, which is never a good news, right? If you want to move forward. And the third aspect that we have to be very careful is the third-party involvement. We need, of course, a goodwill of third parties, but we don't need a rhetoric trying to give a lesson to Greeks or the Turks how to behave in their own environment.
Could, at this point, the United States or Europe be a third party that can facilitate a dialogue between the two countries the day after?
I think neither. United States has lost its trust and credibility in Turkey as far as it can really affect the developments, and it is not accepted as an honest broker at the moment, at least. In the past, the United States was very important.
With the current government? With
the new government.
With Erdogan? What if the opposition wins and we have a change of government?
Look, I do public perception surveys. And I look to the public perception, I look behind the parties, people who vote for different parties. There is no difference in the Turkish public perception, those who are voting for the Erdogan government or those who are voting for the Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu government. as far as these issues or national issues are concerned. So the United States was useful in the past to prevent hot conflict in the Aegean. We have to give it that. But at the moment, it's not accepted and viewed as an honest broker by the Turkish public. Forget about the government.
How about the Europeans?
Turkey is out of European Union. It's not member of it, and Greece is member of it. Just that shows the problematic aspect of it. Having said this, we have to accept that it was the allure of the European Union membership for Turkey that allowed the last rapprochement of 20 years. So we have to keep that in mind. The European Union, in that sense, is important. But if I have to mention one country which could be useful, which was also useful in recent history, is Germany. They were very helpful between 2020 and 2022 to align at least the atmosphere between two countries, and they might be yet useful after the elections in Turkey.
Nilgun, what would be a good incentive for Turkey to sit down with Greece and discuss issues for the day after, peacefully?
Even the possibility of, as I said before, a structured dialogue with a timetable and discussing the problems honestly. Yes, there are problems and they won't go away. But even the possibility of having a genuine dialogue can be a very good incentive for Turkey, I think. Yes, the problems are there. They won't go away. The approach of Turkey might not change, even there would be a change in the government to those problems. But I believe the importance of the change in style, change in narrative. So the narrative definitely is going to change, and they really expect, the opposition expects too much from a dialogue, and they are not wrong. Let me also say a few words about Cyprus. I was together with the foreign policy representatives of the opposition parties in Brussels, and recently there was a paper coming out of Carnegie Europe. They made interviews with the foreign policy representatives of the opposition parties. They believe the negotiations for a settlement within the framework of UN parameters should go on. Until this possibility exhausted, the negotiations should be for bizonal, bicommunal federation. Then, if this possibility goes away for sure, then a two-state solution is going to be discussed. They're against the two-state solution at the moment. So these are important incentives. And for Turkey, I disagree with Günther, what he said. The membership perspective is still there for Turkey. If Turkey stops democratic backsliding in the country and reinstate the rule of law, fundamental freedoms, etc. My most favorite poet is Kavafis. You know his famous poem, Ithaca. Yes, the journey to Ithaca is important, but what happens if the island disappears? Then we'll be drowned. So the membership perspective should be there. I also think it is an important incentive. It played its role in the past for the rapprochement between countries, and Greece was supporting Turkey's accession to the EU, officially and sometimes unofficially. So these are important incentives, I think.
Mr. Larigakis, a change of government in Turkey could signal a better relations, closer relations between Ankara and the West and Washington particularly?
Difficult for me to say, and only time, as usual, will tell. I think, there's always going to be change. How you deal with the change is what makes a difference. But there's got to be, others have said it, there's got to be political will for that change to be able to take root, to succeed. And sometimes, if between parties things are not going in a certain direction, that has the tendency to affect a greater region, that's when others have to step in my humble opinion, and push things and to move it in a certain direction. President Christodoulidis, which I just met with in Cyprus a couple days ago, and his foreign minister seem to be, at least on the Cyprus issue, very willing and are looking to come up with new ways to put forth regarding solving this irretractable, issue now that's going on for, like I said, 50 years. But at the end of the day, it's still an illegal violation. It's still an occupation. It may have happened 50 years ago, but those parameters don't change. And those are the facts that we have to deal with. And as a fact of the Yenel plan, It wasn't that easy. The Yenel plan was where the Republic of Cyprus was going to have to pay for the whole integration, and Turkey always had a right to have permanent Turkish presence and always had a right to come in and whenever it felt its national security interests were a threat. Well, that's very loose that no country can ever accept for in any plan. But I do agree regarding regarding Greece and Turkey relations, Cyprus is the key component, and if it doesn't move forward in the way that needs to take place, it's always going to be there no matter what else happens between the two on a bilateral level. That issue is going to be there. They're both guarantor powers, something that needs to be addressed and needs to go away. And the last thing I'll just say on Cyprus is that Turkey, the third party, just needs to step out of the negotiations, in my opinion. Okay, let the two communities solve the issue. If you allow the two parties to come in, I think you would have that issue solved in less than a year because they would have it. Turkey's interests on Cyprus are different from the Cypriots, Turkish and Greek. And you have the other element, unfortunately, of the illegal settlers, which again is another illegal violation of the Geneva Convention, okay, where no one really knows what that number is now. Some say it could be as high as 500,000. That's a lot. And they should not have a right to vote and moving forward in any such plan. But again, these are difficult questions, but discussion and dialogue can get us there.
Thank you so much. Interesting views we heard here at the panel. Thank you all for your participation, and thank the audience for the attention.